Life After the Fight is a show that speaks to everyday issues pertaining to our mind, body, and soul. We will address topics ranging from mental health, self care, fatherhood, family, relationships, and more. Our goal is to encourage listeners to keep fighting through the obstacles, challenges, and struggles. The focal point is simple: seek a fresh perspective, become teachable, and improve your overall health and wellness. If you're craving more growth and development, this podcast is for you.
Life After the Fight. We're back for another amazing episode of this. Ricky, welcome back.
Yes, sir.
We got a treat. Like I promised last time we were leaving, we asked for permission and we got granted it. So Michelle is back.
Yes, she is.
And we're going to continue with the story. But first of all, I want to let Ricky give you guys an additional part to this story of the topic that we'll be talking about within this story. Ricky?
Yes. Thank God for the audience's support, and for Michelle coming back to grant us with another episode. The last one we were talking about the product of an affair, and so this time we're going to get a little bit deeper and get some meat into it. We're going to deal with when grief and pain impacts the body. And of course, for those who tuned in for the last show, we were talking about mistakes and purpose, and being a product of an affair and how that impacted you. And so now, audience, we can deal with the personalization and also the internal challenges. And so, Michelle, if you can just kind of let us know, just in a nutshell, based on our last conversation, and how you were impacted by the affair between both of your parents, and you now being a parent, you now being a wife, and you actually having a family. Kind of talk to us about how that has impacted you over the years, as far as your personal and emotional development.
So, one of the things I think happened after my mom passed, I mean, again, I was 16. So, how do you register
Right.
that,
Yes.
your mom passing at 16? And so,
So that's the process.
it's a process, right? And initially, there was a part of me that was angry with God, like, how could you take my mother from me? And I remember having a conversation with a cousin of mine saying, well, if my mom dies, I can't live.
Yeah.
I can't go on. And so that was for furthest from the truth, obviously. But what I think happened is delayed grief. So
Delayed grief.
delayed grief. So because again, I'm 16.
Yes.
So how does that
You're not able to
register?
process fully.
My
Yes,
first
16.
day of school after her funeral, was the day after her funeral, across the street from where she was buried.
Gotcha. Wow.
So, I have time to process that. And I distinctly remember on that first day of school, they announced on the PA that my mom passed and
Wow.
asked, and said a prayer. I went to an all girls Catholic school. And so, they said, let's say a prayer for Michelle Green,
Yeah.
Michelle Smith at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her mom, passed away. And so, again, how do you process that? So, fast forward years later, I, get accepted, to USC, and I'm going to school, and, I get a Cal grant and a loan. And so that's how I'm able, to afford
Of
it.
course.
I wanted to live on campus, but, literally we were maybe 10 minutes away from campus. So that wasn't going to happen. And I remember in my freshman and primarily my sophomore year, there was a point in time where I just wasn't I mean, there were some classes that, yeah, I enjoyed and, well, this is cool and I gave effort. But there was a point in time where there were some classes that I just was checked out. I was completely
Definitely.
checked out.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why. But all I knew is that I was having a final at that moment, but I decided to sit on the quad and just kind of look and people watch. And so it didn't hit me. And then I ended up, of course, on academic probation. And
A rite of passage.
rite of passage.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, yes, it is.
And so at some point, it put me in check, because my aunt, who I'm now living with, they're not asking to see my grades. They had an expectation. You go to school, you go to, you do well, and she did find out eventually, and but I realized later, I really believe in a lot of ways that it was delayed grief, and then that it was like emotional paralysis. That's what I
Mm,
call it, right?
okay. Good
And
description.
and then later in like after I graduated, I had a few episodes of having, which I didn't know what they were, but panic attacks. And so whatever I was feeling or going through started manifesting itself in my body. And I didn't know what that was. I'm having cold sweat, I'm nervous, I'm on edge. And I remember distinctly going to Kaiser and I said to the doctor, what's wrong? I'm thinking I'm having a heart attack. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm early 20s, right?
Mhm.
And he was like, and so after asking a series of questions, he said, you're having a panic attack. And I was like, I'm having a what? And so it was delayed grief. And I believe wholeheartedly. And it started manifesting itself through stress and worry. And one of the things that I made a conscious effort as well to do, my mother worried a lot. And like I spoke on the last episode, I feel strongly that the worry and the guilt that she carried manifested itself
Yes,
in
sir.
her body. And she had breast cancer. So that's what she passed of. And I said to myself, okay,
I want to
I
interject something real quick. You just
absolutely.
made me think of something.
Hmm.
We say worry, and we say things. I'm sorry. You said worry, and what was it? And stress.
Hmm.
Well, another word that comes to my mind that is not often talked about with regards to that: confusion.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
I can see that.
Because a lot of times you can worry and stress over things that you don't
Understand.
understand.
That's it.
And when
Hmm.
you don't understand something,
Hmm.
you're waiting for some kind of clarity on it.
Hmm.
So that's the one component that is, as you were
Yeah.
talking, it came to my mind. Yeah, we go, it's a stressful situation. I know it's this and that and the other.
Good
But
point.
the
Good
word
point.
confusion is something
Right.
that never comes into play.
Never.
And that's a
Right.
very important word because, just because I give you information doesn't mean you comprehend it.
True.
And
True.
who wants to? Can I interject something?
True.
Who really wants to acknowledge that they're confused about
Hmm.
something? A lot of people wouldn't.
Right.
They'll use words like stress and worried and which are
Hmm.
legitimate words, but
Hmm.
no one really wants to acknowledge the fact that they don't have it all together as far as just not knowing. The average
Hmm.
person is not going to acknowledge that they're just confused.
True.
So I'm glad you said that because we don't address that.
We don't. And we need to address that more
We
often
do.
because lack of understanding, and I don't want to get biblical on this, but one of the things lean not towards your own understanding.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, and I'm getting ethereal with this statement here, but a lot of times we come into life without plans and we don't set ourselves up for preparatory situations or put ourselves in those positions. Because one of the things that really comes to my mind is that life was here before you got here. It's here while you're here, and it will be here when you're gone.
Hmm.
So when people, because I've heard many people say, well, I made this plan and that plan and the other and didn't go the way I wanted to go. I say more often than not, it's never going to go the way you wanted to go because you joined life. Life didn't
Not
join
join
you.
you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
having a clear, firm understanding, clarity about things. And I'm thinking with regards to what you were saying about your mother having, and you having delayed grief. Um, the thing that came to my mind was that, emotional / mental manifestations can evolve into physical plights.
Mhm.
because, again, lack of understanding of, oh, if I do this, then this is possibly the natural next occurrence.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't put those two things together. One of the things that I constantly wrestle with when I'm talking with people is, in today's terminology, we talk about, oh, mental health, mental health, mental health. And I asked someone this the other day. I said, well, if your mental health is together, then typically your physical health is going to be together anyway. However, why do we have such a separation between the two?
Mhm.
Health is health.
Yeah.
It's not mental, not physical. You need
Mhm.
to have them both together.
Both together.
Absolutely.
And so that's part of
Mhm.
the process of why anxiety occurs, is because the mind and the body have no communication with each other.
They're not in sync with each
Mhm.
other.
Right.
They're actually operating as its own entity.
Mhm.
And so, that's why so many people put so much emphasis in mental health. I'm like, well, what about the physical? Let's put them together.
Right.
So I guess a question that I have for you is, while you were going through
Mhm.
those that delayed grief
Mhm.
and those challenges, at what point at that time did you seek any type of help or get any type of understanding to be able to actually move past it? Because we already know that was a very challenging process, especially you being in 11th grade, losing your mom, and then you finally get into
Mhm.
college, and it's like
Mhm.
it finally caught up to you. So now
Right.
it's like now you're dealing with, okay, I'm in college now. I'm a
Mhm.
woman. I have these
Mhm.
responsibilities. Like, what was the turnaround? Like, what helped you to just kind of get on track and to really deal with what you were challenged
Um, I will say, and again, not to get too spiritual on here, I'm not going to use the word religious, is my relationship with God.
with? Definitely.
That was the turning point. Um, and both have touched on some real interesting things because you talked about confusion and you talked about, the mental. And let's be real, mental health was not a conversation that we had
No,
at
it was not.
years ago,
Nope.
much less when I was 16 or when. So
Let me go
nobody,
further. Emotions were not even a
We didn't
conversation.
talk about
right,
emotions.
right,
Because that was looked at as a being weak.
Being weak.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So nobody was like, "Oh, let's put Michelle in therapy."
Yeah,
She
exactly.
just
What's
lost her
therapy?
mom,
Exactly.
What's I'm now going to live with my aunt who is married and they don't have any kids, but she's going into this situation where she's not used. Nobody was talking about putting me in therapy. So, yes, confusion came into play. And I'm sure that did for my mom too because especially coming from the culture and the background that she came from, it's a taboo to talk about it
Yes,
in
it is.
general in the Black community,
Yes.
much less the Black community from another country, right?
Yeah.
So there was probably
With strict
ex-
religious inclinations.
potentially
Yes.
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 And so no one was talking about, oh, let's go get therapy and let's seek some help for this. In a lot of ways, I would say I kind of figured things out on my own. But I can't say that because I have a relationship with God.
There
He
you go.
figured them out for
Yeah,
me,
he helped you.
right? And so I remember in
He
my
revealed to you the information until you needed
There you
exactly,
go.
exactly. And so I started going to church with my aunt and uncle at the time, and then another aunt and uncle. And then I started seeking my own, place of service. And so I went to a mega church, but I was being taught differently. And so, and totally different from what, the religion, excuse me, that I grew up in. And so essentially, it was through that I started to gain some knowledge of what was happening. Now, medically, yes, I didn't understand it. So when I went to the doctor and he said you're having an anxiety attack, I'm not gonna lie. I don't remember if the internet is what it was then that it is now, but I'm sure and Google probably wasn't around. Maybe I'm aging myself, but I researched it and I was like, anxiety, what is
Yeah,
that?
what is
Right.
that?
And so I started doing some research of my own. But absolutely, I think I know that it was through God's grace
There you go.
that I was able to get on the right track, because one of the things I said I was going to do, I tried to pray away that fear. Do I still have fears? Do I still have anxieties? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a human being.
Yeah.
And now a parent of my own, a parent and my children of my own, and trying to seek ways to help them maintain their,
Yes.
sanity as they're growing up, right? But that was one of the main things. It was God's grace, I think, and mercy that brought me through and tried to and gave me some clarification, gave me some insight as to what was happening in my mind and in my body. And so it was through constant and continuous prayer that, and again, even at that point, I don't have the relationship with God that I do today. I've matured in that relationship, but based on the teachings that I was getting at that time, that's what I knew to do. And so, I wasn't having a conversation with my cousins and my family about, yeah, I think I'm having delayed grief. None of them know. When they see this, they're gonna be like, what? We didn't know that. I didn't know that. It took a while for me to realize. I was like, yeah, that's what was happening to me. So,
I have a question.
mhm,
So,
mhm,
and like I said, it's so interesting how we look at how things were when we were growing up versus how it is today,
mhm,
and how today we have so many resources, so many labels, and so many different types of programs. Back then, all we really had was God. All we really had was prayer, and all we had
mhm,
was the support. But the question I do have for you is this: as you move past all of those challenges with the pain and the grief, and then you got into your own personal relationship and you start dating, you eventually got married. Has there been any point during that time and to present, to current,
mhm.
that you still deal with some type of grief and pain? And if so, how do you handle it knowing you now have a family that you have to care for?
Wow. Man, yeah. Last year, when I think it was last year, yeah, last year for it was my mother's birthday, I think. And I'm not on Facebook a lot, but I was sitting at the kitchen counter or the island, and I said, I want to post a picture of my mom. And I put a little, I don't know how to do reels and all that stuff, but I was like, okay, let me try this out. And I, added a song to it. And after doing all of that and figuring out all the, technicalities of it, and I posted it, I broke down at the island. It's been 30 plus years that my mom has passed, right? And it's never something that you move completely past, right?
Yeah.
Especially when I had children, because, my aunt didn't have children of her own. So I couldn't have a conversation with her necessarily
Yeah.
about what my body was going through and all
Yeah.
that stuff. So my mom wasn't there, to see me have those kids and to help me rear those children, right? And so I broke down. And I'm like, where is this coming from? Right. And so, but again, what helped me through it, because see, and I want to say maybe one of the kids was at home or coming home or something. And, kids feel your energy, right?
Mhm.
They
Yes, they
feed
do.
off of that
Yes, they
energy.
do.
And especially my younger son.
Definitely.
And so, not that you want to, I'm okay with my children seeing me cry, because I'm human, and I'm not going to have, no, I don't want to break down completely in front of them. But they have to understand that mom is human, mom is a person, mom has feelings, and so, you know, they've seen me in tears. But at the end of the day, I think again, what helped me through that was, whether it was calling a good friend and saying, look, I'm gonna need you to pray for me, or calling particularly a cousin or someone who has been through it themselves, who has lost a mother. I oftentimes felt, and a lot of people don't understand this, that I was blessed in some ways behind my mother's death. And people think you're crazy when you say something like
I
that.
don't think you're crazy.
But I
Not
would
at
not
all.
be the person today that I am without that experience. right?
You made me think of a question here with that. If you can recall, and if you can, it's okay, because I'm going to help you by adding to the question. When you broke down, do you recall what you were feeling at that moment, and would it have been loss or something else?
It was the loss.
Okay.
It was not having her physically here to see what I've accomplished and to see what her hand was in developing this human being.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. I was sick last week. I had a mild cold, a bad cold, I guess you could say. Nothing other than that. And typically, when I get sick, because as a child I had asthma, really bad as a child, and so my mother she made up all these, concoctions
Concussions.
and Vicks on my chest and
Remedies.
all these remedies and
Mhm.
stuff. And typically, when I get sick, and it happened just last week, I get very emotional because I feel like I want my mom here to
What's your
take
mom?
care of me. I want my and as a mother and as a wife, you're oftentimes taking care of everyone else as a in your job.
So you get recall.
I get recall.
Mhm.
And it's like, man, I wish she was here
Yeah.
to physically take care of me, to physically hug me, to rub that Vicks on my chest, or to
Yeah.
whatever, tell me it's going to be okay. Don't, stop crying. It's just going to make it worse. I remember hearing her say that. But,
So I appreciate hearing you say this
mhm,
because I lost my father over 20 years ago.
mhm,
And hearing how you grieve or grieve is interesting because my grief of him and loss is a bit different
mhm,
in the sense that, I miss his presence.
mhm,
However, nothing about it makes me sad.
mhm,
I think about the lessons that he taught me,
mhm,
and I think about what I'm about to do.
mhm,
And even if I make a different choice in what I'm about to do, it's more of in my mind saying, hey, I'm choosing a different way to do this because although I appreciate how you would have handled the situation, I think that I've evolved to a place where I can do it a little bit better.
mhm,
And so I carry him with me all the time,
mhm,
but not in a grievous fashion.
mhm,
More of that's the way he did it. This is the way I'm doing it. Although I appreciated having to see the example,
mhm,
but it doesn't make me sad. And so that's why I
mhm,
asked the question because I know some people, it makes them sad and they grieve and this and that and the other. For
mhm,
me,
mhm,
my recall is all about simply the lesson. I spoke at my father's funeral
mhm,
and I didn't shed a tear at all.
mhm,
I had the understanding, and to preface it, I'm a former PK. My dad was a pastor.
mhm, mhm,
So having that particular rearing, I knew that he had run, I guess you could say, his course.
mhm,
And that for him to have been here, I have an older brother, and we have a little friction there about this because my father was sick. He was praying for him to get well, and my prayer was that God's will be done in the
There you
situation.
go.
right.
And God took him home. I said, well, he
Mhm,
says, well, you didn't love him as much as I did. And I said, that has nothing to do with it. I said, first
right,
of all, he was God's before he was ever my father or your father.
right.
So I processed it differently. So I
Mhm,
love when I'm able to speak to someone who's lost a
mhm.
parent and see
Yeah.
what their process was.
And I want to say mine was probably different because, losing her at 16, I wasn't mature enough to have she taught me a lot of great lessons. Let's
Mhm.
start there. And I do reflect on those lessons sometimes in things that I do in my life. But I wasn't at a stage in my life when she passed to have had major conversations and lessons learned with her. I'm 16.
Right.
You know, I don't want to hold
obviously
her
could not
hand.
could not
Right.
have passed the baton
Right.
to you at that point.
Right. I don't want to
Obviously.
hold her hand in the mall, you know, and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I'm more of that, you know, your teenage years, you
Exactly.
kind of want to back off, right? Although I could not be rude to my mother because she would kill me with a look, much less
Right.
her hands. But so I didn't have that opportunity. So it's not all the time that when I reflect on her that it is, you know, a sad or emotional situation. What it is though is that she didn't see enough of where I could be or where I
Gotcha.
have been, and I wish that she could have.
Yeah.
And you want the loss of that, and I totally understand
Yes.
that. So that
Yes.
makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
We're running on time now, but I have a question that came to mind that just literally just popped in my head.
Mhm.
You mentioned you have two sons.
Mhm.
How do you think the lessons of what you have gone through in your youthful life to this point, what could you relay to them that you think would be an impactful scenario, story, statement that helps them on their journey because of what you've been through?
Well, I actually had a conversation with my oldest the other day, who's
Oh, good.
16.
Good.
And, you know, he wasn't doing so well in one class. And I was talking to him about he plays baseball and he, you know, loves playing baseball. He wants to go to college. And I was talking to him about our expectations of him. And I said to him something that I had never said to him before. I said, son, I said, you're 16 years old. I said, you know where I was at 16? I said, I lost my mother at 16. I said, so think about it. Think about
Good
if
segue.
you were
Yes.
in this situation where you lost your mom. I said, we've had this conversation with you about your junior year. It's one of your most critical years in high school because that's what the colleges will look at, right? I said, I went to school the day after my mother's funeral across the street from where she was buried. And I had to process that. And I said to myself, Michelle, this is what you're going to do for your mom, right? I said, the very least you could do
Mm.
is pay close attention to what we're telling you, absorb it. And if you need help, never think that you can't come to me or your dad for help.
That's good. That's good.
And so I had to check him and let him know, I know it's hard. I know it's a struggle. In fact, guess what? Not only was I dealing with being a teenager and hormones and all that stuff, I just lost my mother. So think about it. Put it in perspective if you had just lost me and you still had to do what you had to do. So I say that to say that I don't bring that up to make him sad or to make him angry, but to let him understand and make him understand. And who knows, the youngest one was probably ear hustling somewhere in the other room. So I hope he heard it as well. But it was to
Hopefully.
hopefully,
Yes.
because I have the same conversation with him. Well, probably not. They're a little different, but a lot different. But at the same time, I wanted him to understand the brevity of what I had to deal with and what you now are charged to do without having those same
That's good.
challenges.
Because you have boys,
Mhm.
I want to share with you something that I've taken as a lesson through my life and I give to my boys.
Mhm.
And you can even share this with your husband.
Mhm.
I was in college at this time, but I've always been a very people say think outside. I think in the box because I got enough tools and I want to investigate what I have. So thinking outside the box is not my thing because I don't know what's outside the box, but I know what I possess.
Mhm.
But my father said this to me once. He said, son, and this was I'd gotten kicked out of the university I went to, but unbeknownst to him, I knew I was getting kicked out, and so I got my grades together and I transferred to another school, knowing that when I got accepted to the other school, I was getting kicked out of the old school.
Smart.
He said, "Oh, you're a slick guy."
Right.
I know.
I see what you're doing.
But my point to that, he said to me these words, and I never forgot them as long as to this day. He said, "Son, who is your future important to?" And I paused and I thought. He goes, "It's not a trick or a hard question." He goes, "You." He because your future is not important to me. He says, I've lived most of my life. I've been successful with my life. He says, I'm going to love you just because you're my son. He says, you can be the most successful janitor in the street.
Mhm.
He says, but is that what you want to do?
Mhm.
So I say that to my own sons. I say, listen, I'm going to be your dad and I'm going to love you.
Mhm.
I said, my only goal is that you're happy
Right.
and you're not hurting other people.
Right.
But do understand and bear this in mind. What you're doing today is what you will live with tomorrow.
There you go.
Mhm.
So if you don't want tomorrow to look like today,
Mhm.
then understand the importance of what your future is going to be,
Right.
because it's incumbent upon you to take the steps and necessary actions to get to that place.
Mhm.
That's all.
Thank you.
Wow. Well,
Good
you
lesson.
know, we had another one. And you know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb, like Tina Marie, and I'm really interested in bringing Michelle back
No, I'm not coming
for
back.
for
I'm just
for
joking.
but in the near future when she's
Yeah.
ready. But I
Mhm.
really appreciated your insight, your input, and just you being transparent. And I think the audience can appreciate that because
Mhm.
me and George, we really was excited to know
Mhm.
that we were having a woman come on to really complement the show, and I think you've exceeded that. And so, if George is okay with it, we want to have you come back
Sure.
in the near future, and I'm sure the audience, would agree with it. So, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, and thank you, audience, for having us. And as we close out, we just want to say, thank you for tuning in. Life After the Fight. We share fresh, new perspective. We're not trying to tell people what to do. We're just trying to share ideas on how to do them.
Thank
All
you
right.
both for having me. I really, really enjoyed this, I have to
Yeah.
say.
We enjoyed the conversations with you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right.
Thank
Until
you.
next time, take care.